friends, welcome to episode 66 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I am Sarah.
I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
Pretty good.
Yeah?
Pretty good.
Good.
I didn't get great sleep last night, but overall the day really came around for me, and I've got pretty good energy now.
You know, last night was the first night in a while that I've gotten good sleep, because it finally cooled down to like low 60s overnight. And I had the window open, the fan on, I pulled the comforter right up to my nose.
Nice.
Cat snuggled up with me. And
Snuggles are the best.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then the workday was the workday from hell. So all that was blown out the window, but we are here now. We are here doing the podcast, our online therapy session, and we've got a good discussion, I think, going tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've talked a little bit about this topic before. We've graced it when we've talked about gods and world design, but we've never really sat down and got into the nitty-gritty of what can happen. I mean, even when we're talking about, like, what can happen at your table and how to handle certain situations.
So we're talking tonight about killing characters.
Yes.
Not players.
Correct.
That is a completely different discussion. And as Sean was apt to point out to me, that's called homicide. I learned something today.
We all learn.
Detroit Homicide Police have joined the chat. But yeah, no. I mean, it's something that I think kind of deserves its own topic all to itself, which is why we're doing this today. And because it's kind of present in almost every single game, you know, that leveraging every bit of danger against that fear of death, you know, and, you know, the adventures, the high stakes that you get avoiding death, you know, you wear armor, you have shields, or, you know, subdermal plating and cyberware, or whatever it is,
sure.
Whatever is the order of the hour, all that's there to stop you from dying.
Well, yeah. I mean, and there are games that don't lean heavily into death and kind of take it lightly. I mean, when we look at video games, which is a form of roleplay, definitely, without a doubt. I mean, you look at things like World of Warcraft,
sure,
or some of those where you're actually playing a character and in a world, they play with death very differently. I mean, we play Ark, and death is literally something that happens every 12 seconds at the beginning. Like, there's no way around it, really.
Oh, I spawned next to a raptor. Welp.
Yep.
This is my life now.
And I guess I'll be spawning next to that one again. Hopefully he'll still be eating my corpse while I run away.
Right.
So, no, and so I think just understanding what death means in a game and how to handle those situations, as well as just what it can do to the dynamic of the team and of the game, where
absolutely.
it's at,
and how it can affect your players just as well as, you know, as it can the characters in the game.
Yeah.
Because it is kind of a bit of a momentous occasion. You know, I think so. Talking about some of the just general concerns with character deaths. You know what? Before we get in here, have you ever lost a character?
I have. I've lost. Let's see here. Let me see how far back I can go.
All right.
1, 2. I want to say 3 characters. I've lost 3 characters.
Oh wow.
Notably, I've probably lost more than that, but 3 that I can think of.
Okay.
Early on, I lost a Robotech character. I had a Destroid pilot who literally got he got hit by something a little too hard, basically, is what happened, and ended up dying from it. Never recovered because he was blown into the vacuum of space. So that kind of sucked.
That's rough, buddy.
Yeah, it was. I'd lost a D&D character.
Okay.
Really long time ago. Terrible campaign too. The good part about it, and I'll get to this, was we played it off very lightly. Like, death was a really light thing in that game. So I just rolled up another character and kept going.
Yeah. Some D&D games are like that, where they're just like, you know what, show up with another backup character, because stuff might happen.
Yeah, it was a very dungeon crawly game. There was a lot of us versus the DM going on. So it felt more like a board game than really a typical, you know, tabletop game. We didn't have backgrounds for our characters other than, like, 5 seconds of light discussion, and then we were just in playing. So it really wasn't that big of a meaningful thing. And then I did lose a character at a LARP at a vampire LARP.
Oh yeah, okay.
I got murdered by a Brua. So yeah, but I mean that's a way to go.
I'm gonna be dead honest with you. I don't think I've ever lost a character.
Really?
I don't think I've ever lost a character. I tend to play a little cautious, and even when I was playing recklessly, notably, I know there was one time we were doing another D&D dungeon crawly adventure where it was just kick down the door sort of stuff, and oh, you know what? I think I did lose a character, but like it was literally like a "you can't fire me, I quit" situation.
Yeah,
because the game was so bad that I was they were literally like the DM was like, "I need dice," and I was like, "Okay, what do you need? First off, why didn't you bring your own as the DM? Second off, like, how many dice do you need?" And he's like, "I need all your D6." And I'm like, "I have a big bag of D6 here, man." And he's like, so I handed him like 10 of them. He's like, "More." And I'm like, "Okay." And I'm like, 10 more. He's like, "I probably need more."
You sure you're not
like? He still hasn't told me what's happened yet.
I was about to say, like, you sure you're not playing Shadowrun?
There has been no narration on what is even going on. So this whole time I'm handing him my dice to kill my character with.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, dude, it's been 5 minutes and you're still over there rolling dice and muttering to yourself and going over your notes and stuff.
Whatever.
Like, yeah. What has just happened to my character? And he just kind of looks down, looks at his notes, looks back up at me and goes, "Oh, it was a razor line to shoot." What does it mean? Oh, it's like a shoot, like a pit trap, but it's lined with razors. Okay. And it apparently, we were going up a tower, and it apparently shooted me out the side of the tower, like 100 feet in the air. So not only did I take all the damage from that, but then the fall damage afterwards. But like,
no chance to react.
At that point,
nothing. Yeah.
At that point, I was just kind of like, "Okay, dude, just give me my dice back. I'm gonna take off. This is
dumb. This is dumb. Yeah.
I think it's the only time I lost a character. I've retired several.
Yeah, I've retired characters. Probably not several, but I've retired some characters. So,
have you ever killed characters?
Oh yeah, I've killed a few characters.
I think I TPK'd a group.
Yeah,
I told you about that. I think last cast. But even in there, like there was a couple where like I definitely zeroed somebody out and killed them all. Or I got a couple res spells out of them, but I don't think I've ever like had to have someone re-roll their character.
I don't think in any of my gaming except for way early on did I kill a character and basically force them to create new characters. Like I think I remember doing it vaguely once a long time ago for Rift's game, where they did something incredibly stupid, and I'm like, okay, well, we're gonna roll through this because you guys want to. Yeah, we totally got this. And I'm like, I don't think you understand
the consequences
you're doing
of what you're doing here.
You're literally trying to overrun a UCAS military base with 5 of you. This isn't gonna work out. You're thinking you're gonna walk in, steal something, and walk out the door, like through the front door.
Yeah.
This isn't going to work out. And it did not work out.
And it did not work. It's a spoiler alert.
Yeah.
It did not work out.
Yeah.
All right, so
so where do you want to start?
We've got some marginal experience with this.
Sure.
So of general concerns, effects on the game.
Okay.
So, when a character dies,
sure.
Obviously the story can be altered greatly by that. Any plot threads that are attached to that character, you potentially lose.
Possibly.
So if it is, Tristan the Holy Knight's, job to go and find the Holy Avenger sword, well, when Tristan dies, nobody else really needs that holy sword. He's the only one who could wield it anyway, so I guess that plot thread kind of goes to the wayside,
I mean, there's always reasons for plot threads to switch people. And you could arguably say that with decent negotiation skills on the DM's part, you could hook other players into that story.
I mean, you can.
Yeah.
You can, but that requires effort, though.
Without a doubt, everything requires a little bit of effort. But
I know. I'm just saying is that all the characters' personal plots now cease to more or less exist.
Yep.
Unless you go through the effort to then say, okay, well,
or the players dive in.
The Holy Avenger has chosen a new champion.
Yeah. Or the players are like, we need to see this through.
Right. Right. And they might as a matter of remembrance.
Yeah.
But and that kind of brings us to our second point, though, is you may need it may derail the main plot because you now need a side quest.
Yes.
To either resurrect the character, eulogize the character in some way, if they, if your characters want to see their quest through, or maybe, we have to get them back to their hometown, to their wife and kid, maybe, to lay them to rest.
Yeah.
That, they might have to put their main quest on hold to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely going to impact all the surviving characters and the NPCs in a direct, tangible way.
Yeah.
Any attachments that person had are going to feel the impacts of that character's death.
Yeah. There was one that I thought was really kind of neat. It was a long enough campaign that I was reading about where one of the players had basically created their own phylactery.
Oh, okay.
So they had a phylactery and hid it away, and the other players knew roughly where it was, like what city it was in, which one of his keeps that he had taken.
A phylactery, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, is a vessel, a physical vessel in which one removes their soul and puts it into this phylactery to hold it.
Which, upon your death, activates it and starts to regenerate you there.
Right.
So that you don't die.
Because your soul has not left your body, and gone into the cosmos, wherever the cosmology is, it is contained.
Correct. So as long as it is relatively safe in that position and can reform, you show up there. And there's rules for all of that. Well, one of the players had done this because they had the foreseeable thought that they might die in the game at some point, and this would be kind of a cool thing to have. So the player dies, and they had forgotten about the phylactery by this point. Like, the player had, so did the rest of the gamers. But the DM had notes on all their deaths. And one of the notes on that was that the phylactery was going to happen, right? Mm-hmm. So he's just like, what do you want to say with your dying breath? He's just like, what do you mean? He's just like, you just remembered something. What's that? You have a phylactery. What do you say? You get one statement. He just says the name of the city that it's in. And so the whole group is just like, dude, you can't die. What did he just say? Did he say Belgrin or Berglin? Oh, no. How far are those apart? 4 days' journey. Where are those from here? 2 months' ride.
Oh, God.
Son of a gun.
Oh, God.
So they're like, how long is it going to be before he rises? I don't know. I don't know anything about necromancy or phylacteries. So he could be up tomorrow? Oh, no, it's going to take some time. And so they literally had to run an adventure to go back and get him before somebody else got to him. So it was a neat little side quest that basically the DM had set up of what was going to be happening at that place, and if it was getting sacked, if people were going to be there trying to find him. It was its own adventure that he just had staged ready to go.
Yep.
So.
All right. So the effects on the players, though, and that's kind of I think the other side of the coin here is, sure, we can talk about the in-game implications of death, but what about the players?
They can get quite angry.
They can get angry. They can get attached to their characters,
and comes with
in a lot of ways. And it comes with attachment, but it also role playing can be very intimate. And feeling attached to your character in a way that, like, they're an extension of you. It's not at all uncommon to legitimately grieve the loss of a character.
Without a doubt. I think, and I think the same thing goes for other game types, like especially like online RPGs, where people are just like, when it's meaningful, when there's a severe loss, and there are some games that have like severe losses.
Oh man, I ugly cried through the last 4 hours of Mass Effect 3.
See, there you go.
Oh yeah, Sean was there for it. He can attest to it. It was ugly. But yeah, no, and like I think actually back to like Critical Role. They've had a handful of character deaths on there.
Yeah.
And one of them, a character didn't come back from it. I won't say who because it's not. I don't want to spoil anything in case anybody hasn't seen the second season. But a handful where they have done resurrection rituals to get the person back. But role-playing that and the grief of it and stuff like that, I mean, not a dry eye at the table.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every single player at that table was crying.
Yeah.
You know?
But I mean, especially when you do something week in and week out with the same people, you're building that adventure with them. And when death doesn't happen and then it occurs, like, that's spooky. When they die, that's scary. Like, that's like you've lost something. You've legitimately lost something that's tangible. Time has been invested. It's a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny to say it, but anything that we see here in meat space, as much as we see it in digital space, is an investment. We're taking time to create a world within our mind for it, and why it's there and its importance to us, and the weight we put against it has meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people talk all the time. I remember it was an interview with the Critical Role cast, because a lot of them were new to role playing and new to Dungeons and Dragons at the onset of that campaign, and so it was kind of cool to be able to get like that new player, fresh perspective, hearing from them, recounting their experiences and saying things like, you know, it was amazing that, you know, I thought it was this just make-believe activity, but we find ourselves sitting at Taco Bell after game going, do you remember when you did that thing, or we did that thing?
Right.
You know, and the memories, because it all takes place so vividly in your imagination.
Yep.
It's almost like your brain remembers it like it really happened.
Yeah.
You know, and because of that, you get all of those real, genuine emotions attached to it.
But,
you know, an NPC dies or one of your fellow teammates dies. That's just like, in your mind, to a certain extent, it's just like a real person has died.
Well, there's no difference. Realistically, there is no. You're creating a memory.
Yeah.
So what's the difference?
I mean, there's also been studies shown that we get attached to fictional characters as if they are real.
Because for all intents and purposes, they are.
It's a parasocial relationship, but we get invested in their lives, and when things happen to them, it affects us.
Correct.
It's one of the big reasons why representation matters so much in media, because we identify with these characters.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. So we got some existential shit off our shelves there.
Yeah. Let's deep dive it a little bit.
Okay. All right. Which way do you want to go?
Life is cheap. Battle mechs aren't.
Dear God, is that the truth?
It's one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite role playing games. That's BattleTech. Life is cheap. Battle mechs aren't. Basically saying that mech jockeys come a dime a dozen, but the battle mechs cost millions of sea bills, tens of millions of sea bills potentially. So don't mess the mech up if you're gonna die.
Right. You know, don't make us hose it out.
But I guess the thing is, so what is the cost of life in your setting? Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest arguments against things like resurrection in games. And why the cost of, say, like reagents for doing various resurrection rituals and stuff like that is an important factor. Controlling that as a storyteller within your economy is an important factor.
Yeah.
Because the availability of resurrection essentially immediately affects the cost of death.
Yes.
That's all it does. It just puts a tax on death.
Correct. If it's available at all.
If it's available at all.
I mean, Dragonlance did a very interesting telling of that when we were kids. And I say that when we were kids because there are people who read it through their childhood and who've read it recently. It had a weight. Death had a weight in those stories. I
don't remember, actually. I know I have the books, but...
Resurrection was not a thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's glossed over, but because it's a fantasy setting. And...
I know, but it was a D&D setting is the thing. So
effectively, yeah. And it's...
Well, not effectively. It was a D&D setting.
It was. But that's
I've got the source book for it.
Yeah, there's a whole world wrapped around that, and that concept that in fantasy, death can be just as final, and if not final, can be worse than final. That you can be thrown to another place.
Oh, yeah.
It's sometimes worse or better than you previously were in based upon your actions.
Sure.
And now you're there. Your character is there instead of where it was. And that itself has its own design to it, but I agree that like every world should have that set up, that realism, especially if you're dealing with a tactical world, or a tactical gameplay where your players are looking are being questioned on whether or not they will live or die each game. If you've got mechanics for death, then you need to have mechanics to understand what does that mean.
Exactly.
And you need to get that very clear. On the other hand, if you've got mechanics that basically are like, 7C, where it's like death only happens under certain conditions, then yeah, it's a little different. Like it's not as death isn't as final because it's not really death. It's injury.
And we'll get to games like 7C because the conditions under which death happen is its whole thing. But just the idea that resurrection is something that exists, I've found makes characters a lot more brazen, because they think they can get away with a lot more. Which, on one hand, okay, great, it sets you up to do some great heroics, but there's a certain threshold it reaches where players start to tend to be like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm just stupid at this point, because whatever, we got a cleric.
Right.
I'll be back.
Right.
And I'll be back at the cheap cost of, 300 gold for a diamond in a third level spell slot?
Or not even that. I mean, you deal with situations like in 5th edition right now where death isn't even something that happens as long as you have a cleric. Like, you can go down, but before you even make your first death saving throw, they can literally throw a cantrip at you, and you're stabilized.
It's a first level spell, but yes.
Yeah.
But yes, it's healing word at 60
As a
foot,
bonus action.
60-foot range at a bonus action, just to get you off the
They can fart and basically bring you back up off the ground briefly.
Yes, exactly.
And that makes it a very tactical game.
But at the same time, it does. But to D&D's defense, though, healing in that game is not balanced in a way to outpace or even remotely keep up with damage.
I agree.
There are monsters, especially at the end of game. Have you ever seen the damage that even a medium level breath weapon from a dragon will do?
Yeah.
I mean, it is like 10.
I mean, no, I have not looked at that at all.
Of course you have. No, Sarah, I don't know what you're talking about.
You should give it to me in details, along with these layer rules.
I mean, it's like 7. I mean, they can average 60 or 70 damage, like flat out, like, and that's just moderate level stuff.
Yeah,
like challenge rating 14.
Melting people down to nothing in one hit.
You get up into like elder dragons, and it's just like, okay, well, we're getting to triple digits here, you know. And yeah, sure, okay, I can get you back up to like 4 hit points with a first level spell slot as a bonus action, but you're going back down next turn.
Right.
We're only forestalling the inevitable at this point, unless something changes in our tactics. And so it's forgiving, but it doesn't allow you to just entirely cheat death, and I think I like that about that.
Yeah.
Now I want to swing the discussion entirely in the different direction with death.
Okay.
Just from the idea that each system with it kind of sets its own cost for death.
Like we were saying, yeah.
Okay. Some systems don't have resurrection. Some systems have resurrection, but they have it as a price.
Yep.
What about paranoia?
Oh, God.
The game literally tells you get 6 clones.
That's it.
Because you are expected to die that often.
Right.
And if you make it with your first clone to the end of a game, well, you must have done something treasonous, citizen. Report for termination.
Exactly.
Well, only cheaters would have been able to avoid that, and cheating is treason. So, I mean, you can talk about the cost of life and stuff like that, but it's really per setting. It's really per game system. There are some games that are very flippant with it, and there are some games that are very tight with it. But it all depends on that. But it is something you need to consider when you're running a game, and when you're setting up your encounters and stuff like that, and when you're weighing kind of that like danger and tension as a motivator for your or motivator or demotivator for your players to act in certain ways.
Is it important to your game? Is death important to your game? Is it important to your players? Or is that something that shouldn't be involved because they don't want to deal with that stress?
Well, exactly.
That dictates the system very highly.
And that's I mean that's we'll come back to this point several times I think during this discussion, but that's a session 0 discussion to have.
Oh, so much.
Absolutely a session 0 discussion to have. While you're talking about the setting and their expectations of things, if they want a globe-trotting adventure or if they want to stay in the same city for the entire duration, one of the questions you should ask them is, how do we feel about character death? How do we feel about the lethality of the story we're telling here?
Yeah.
Do you want great risk and great reward? Or do we want to play things a little safe and play a little more, maybe a little more narrative,
Right.
maybe a little more social.
Do you forgive your players even though the system doesn't necessarily have mechanics for it? Do you set up some house rules in there because you like other aspects of it?
Exactly.
You know, do you say, like, even changing systems, so now you're under a new set of rules, do you forgive some of the things that happened in the past?
Mm-hmm.
You know, or do you hold those punishments still legitimate because it's a different world?
Well,
you know, or the same world, different rule system. Like moving from 3.5 to 5,
mm-hmm.
you know, or even 3 to 5, the rules have changed.
Oh, yeah, quite a bit.
Did your world change to accommodate it? Mine did.
Yours did.
So
I don't think it's necessary. By all means, I don't think you need to use in-game things to describe how things work now. They just work that way now. And I don't think you need. I don't think they've changed greatly enough that you need to like retcon your entire past before you change systems or anything.
Well,
like
I'm not saying retcon everything, but
but it is something to take into account.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking a little bit. So Sean and I have been playing a lot of Ghost of Tsushima on the PlayStation 4, and we were really enjoying it. And that got us on the kick of looking into Legend of the Five Rings,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a role-playing system based around a sort of pseudo-Japanese. The one video we watched on it called it a Bushido simulator.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And it's actually shares a lot in common with your favorite 7th Sea.
It does.
In fact, it may even be tied into the same.
We can't discuss. We can't because nobody knows the truth.
We can't.
Nobody.
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know. But it might be. So some people are saying. But we got looking at Legend of the Five Rings, and we're watching a video on character creation for this, and we definitely want to look into this system a little bit more in the future.
Oh yeah.
Maybe teaser of an upcoming system spotlight. Maybe. But that's actually one of the character creation questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's a series of questions you answer, which kind of build your character along with the answers to those questions. And one of those is, how do you want your character to die?
Mm-hmm.
Now that question's in there because part of Bushido,
Mm-hmm.
the samurai code, is to essentially acknowledge that as a samurai you are already dead.
Mm-hmm.
Your death is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
And once you accept that, you can meet death head on.
Right.
And you are fearless in battle then, accepting that you've already died.
Right.
But it does get the player thinking about, okay, death maybe is inevitable. We're doing character creation, we're already talking about the death of my character. How do I want that to happen? Not only gets me thinking about it as a player,
Mm-hmm.
but it also sets a cue for the storyteller of, if it is going to happen, this is a situation you and I have already discussed where I believe it would be acceptable for this character to meet their end.
Right. Right.
You're almost implicitly giving the storyteller permission to kill your character like that.
Yeah. If I'm going to shoot you, you'll be facing me.
And you'll be armed.
You'll be armed.
Yep.
Yeah. It's those kind of moments that define more about the character than all of the history and other pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I get it.
So if you're going to do it.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea. I can remember, I remember doing some studying on it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember doing some history stuff when I was younger, and really liking the way that world looked at life and death,
Mm-hmm.
and that balance. And it's so different. It's different than anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it takes a lot to get into it. So it'd be interesting to examine that more.
Yeah, I've been buried so much in Western and pseudo-Western role-playing for so long. It'd be nice to get into some of the Eastern philosophy and and world building and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Really cool. So
Sip tea and enjoy a game.
yeah, absolutely. All right, so if you're going to do it,
Sure.
if you're going to kill a character,
Yes.
we've come to this. How to kill a character.
No, you know my style. I still follow 7th Sea's rule that villains kill characters. Everyone else is just injuring the shit out of them, or capturing them, or doing something else. Because I feel it's. I guess I just always felt that it's cheap otherwise.
Yeah, and I think that's one of my biggest points that I've hammered on this one. We talked about. We had a whole episode about traps, traps and puzzles and dungeons and stuff like that. And I had a bit of a rant. I got up on a bit of a soapbox and talked about how I can't stand traps and stuff like that because they feel cheap.
Very much so.
You're gonna make a deck save. Well, why am I making a deck save? Because a pit trap just opened underneath you.
Well, it's board game rules at that point.
Okay, now I fell into some spikes, and that's how my story ends.
Mm-hmm.
I failed one roll.
Yeah.
and I'm just dead. Thanks.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. It's I always take that back to board game rules. Like if you're playing in a dungeon, you're technically playing board game rules.
You really are.
Like you're not really role playing. I mean, you are to a degree. You have a role in it, but for all intents and purposes, you're playing a board game.
Well, if your entire game is a dungeon,
Right.
I mean, you can have a dungeon crawl in a narrative game. You know, God knows we've done enough of our
have.
own dungeon crawls going through Iliad ruins in my game.
But again, they don't feel like classic dungeons. They feel like appropriate locations with problems. They're not filled with odd pit, spike, rope, dart traps.
Exactly.
Razor blades that dump you out a window. I mean, like, I'm not saying that there isn't a place for that, but that's not at a table like we have.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But you know, to the point though, D&D is filled. It's a very highly lethal game.
Oh yeah.
You know, you've got danger around every corner. Most of the abilities that are on your character sheet to begin with have to do with combat.
Well, a good what did we do? Figure there was 60 to 70% of the book is ways that either you're killing someone or something's killing you.
Yeah.
Like there's very little skill, and then there's almost no social.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sorry.
And that's honestly where most of our conflicts in my D&D game have come from. Is someone wanted to do a social thing, and we just don't have fleshed out rules for social in D&D,
right?
Because it's so dedicated to combat. It's so based around that adventuring, combative, turn-based, strategic gameplay.
Correct.
Then now, of course, you've mentioned 7C. Only villains kill characters.
Yeah, it takes out of the equation the basic day-to-day kind of fighting. So like, oh, I'm fighting these brutes to get on the ship, right? And we don't succeed. Okay, well, we didn't succeed. Does that mean we're all dead? No. It means you got knocked out or severely injured, and they bagged your heads, and now you are in, done at the jail. And in walks a henchman, to point his finger at you and kick you in the ribs, and then walk out the door and forget that you're there. Because you'll stay there forever.
And now you can enact your daring escape, and it's all big and heroic, and
Right, or call in a favor, spend some reputation, whatever. And now you step out and can continue on the saga in a different direction with different pieces of the history now thrown into it where, you were dead. Another one that you like to put out is Adventure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Adventure has a whole system in it for what they call dramatic editing. And your characters get to spend their main resource, which is called inspiration, to cause amazing coincidences to happen on their behalf. Because they are dramatis personae. They're characters who fate kind of just says, okay, I'll let you fudge that. Which makes them pulp action heroes, essentially, in a world that is more or less a real world. One of the abilities in the game, actually, and you can do this on the small scale, but there is a very powerful ability that allows you to expend a lot more of your inspiration points to do this, where basically unless, and maybe even if, someone is standing over your body putting bullet after bullet after bullet into your skull, if you can come up with a clever enough story about how you avoided death, hey, guess what?
Yep, it can happen.
You get to live.
Yep.
And like you cite that scene from, was it Hudson Hawk?
Hudson Hawk, the end of Hudson Hawk.
It was like, we saw you go over the cliff.
Airbags.
But then your car burst on fire. Fire extinguisher. Flame retardant chemicals. Something like that.
A sprinkler system. Can you believe it?
Yeah. And like, but then you just, so like, okay, your character, your car went off the cliff, but at the last second, you reached out and you jumped out of the thing and you used your knife to cut the rag top off the back of the car and used it as a crude parachute, and that allowed you just to softly land in the ocean. You were knocked out, but you were still clinging to to one of the seat cushions, which act as a flotation device for you, which you were adrift for 3 days and starved and dehydrated when you washed up on a desert island somewhere, and there was a tribe of natives on this desert island, and they saw there was a bit of tinfoil that was wrapped around your head from the crash debris and stuff like that, and They thought that you were a god, so they elevated you to their position. They nursed you back to health with fine meats and cheeses and things like that. And then eventually you said you needed to ascend because you knew you needed to go home, but you needed an excuse to get back. And so they put you on this golden chariot, which actually turned out to be an old crashed Cessna that was within working operation. And I flew it back to the mainland, and now here I am. Sorry I'm late.
Yeah. Yep. That's adventure in a nutshell.
And that's adventure in a nutshell. We'll get there next week.
Yep.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. 7th Sea 2nd Edition has mechanics for that too, in the sense that like if you fail a test, and you're basically out of the scene, so you'll come into the next scene, but you have to explain what happened. So, for instance, like if everybody's jumping building to building, and one of the consequences, you have to make it to the jump to the building, but one of the consequences is you take damage, going across from bullets being sprayed at you, or you lose something along the way of value, and they're like, well, I'm not going to lose value, and I don't want to take damage. Well, you're not going to make the success. Okay, and it's like. So everybody else is jumping across. When they look back, you didn't make it. And they look down on the street below, and I'm not there. Okay, we're going to keep going.
Yep.
So the next scene, literally, like, they're walking into a pub, and there you are. Okay, explain how.
Covered in
soot, I'm
bottle of rum.
Yeah, I'm sitting amongst 4 other city guards in half city guard clothing with lipstick covering my face. You see, when I jumped, I actually missed the roof and landed 3 windows down, tumbling into a brothel. Now, I actually hit 2 thieves that were in there stealing their stuff. When they all came crashing to the door and saw me stealing it, they assumed I was one of the guards who was helping take care of those thieves, so I was praised mightily. In fact, I knew 3 other girls, but that's besides the point.
They were happy to see me back.
So, it's stuff like that you can easily roll in, and I think that adds a lot of fun narrative and flexibility to those stories.
I think another thing too. I mean, like most games in general have some sort of an HP mechanic or a stress track of some sort that tallies up the amount. Like 7th Sea has flesh wounds and dramatic wounds and stuff like that.
Or the death spiral in the new one, yeah.
But essentially, it has some sort of mechanic of saying, okay, you've taken this much damage or inconvenience or whatever, this much punishment. At which point, after which, we need to start discussing the loss of your character because it's just too much for them to take. So I mean, it kind of gives you the ticking clock to see when that sort of thing is coming up. And it also gets you to, some time to start thinking about what you want to do when, if and when that does happen.
Yeah.
I liked a lot of what Dungeon World does. Dungeon World discusses success with consequences.
I've always liked, when I saw that in Dungeon World, it really piqued in me. I was like, this is neat. I want to explore this and see how this can be used better.
Like, okay, the ogre is going to try to hit you. You need to roll to block this.
Right.
And if you fail, like, okay, he could do some damage to you, or you can lose something.
There's always consequences.
Right. So, yeah, you raise your axe just in time, but he splits the haft in 2, so now you're weaponless.
Exactly.
Now what do?
Exactly. And for that, you can negotiate that. And I think another one that does that really well is Mouse Guard.
You put the choice in the player's hands. You say, okay, so how are you inconvenienced by this? How are you set back?
Right. And then the severity of that setback weighted against what the situation is.
So, I mean, death and lethality doesn't always have to be a thing. You got plenty of options to work around it. But honestly, though, I think making death seem worth it, like getting to the point where the death of the character becomes inevitable, but doesn't feel cheap. Nobody wants to feel cheap. You want them to feel like they died with their boots on.
Right.
They want to go out fighting. Unless you're playing Paranoia, of course. At which point, report for termination, citizen.
Right.
Because cheap deaths in that game is the only type of death there are.
And it's just funny.
Funny.
But you know that going into it.
Exactly.
You're playing the game for that reason.
But yeah, I think most of the time players want to, like I said, they want to die with their boots on. They want to, especially like a lot of our media, our movies, our TV shows and such like that. They are all, most of the character deaths in those are heroic.
Yeah.
You know,
Or meaningful.
I mean, there's some. It depends on the story you're watching. Obviously, there's definitely their fair share of cheap deaths, their off-screen deaths, fridging of characters and such like that. But I think that the deaths that you look at and you go, yeah, that was the way that character should have gone out. Those are the heroic ones,
Yeah.
The ones where they died fighting, or they died taking out the bad guy with them, or they died for something they believed in.
Right.
The
professional.
Exactly. This is from Matilda.
Exactly.
Oh, what a great line.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, and but again, you remember those deaths for both of them.
Yes.
Those kinds of things, that's what you want for not only your players, but also for the things that are important to them. If there's a villain or a henchman that they've been working at for a long time, don't make it cheap.
Yeah.
Don't make it easy. Make it meaningful. If the henchman needs to survive it, have them survive it. Whatever. You're doing that with the players anyways. Why not do the same thing for them?
Yeah, pretty much.
Give them a giant scar, or something when they come back around.
A scar and a grudge.
Exactly.
On the other hand, spend 3 months nursing themselves back to hell.
Yeah. On the other hand, if that person was a complete and utter jerk, and ruined with them, when the player decides that they're not listening and kicks them into a giant fan blade on a spaceship,
yeah,
that sometimes is exactly what they need.
Sometimes that's what they need. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I would say if you are going to do it, and it does come down to it, first off, make sure it's worth it. But also, I think, let the character have their moment. I think is another good thing. The one time I think that I've seen Matt Mercer kill a character in Critical Role, again, I won't say who.
Right.
But the question was, what would you like your character's last words to be? How do you react in this situation? And for those of you in D&D, and I've given this a lot of thought too, because I run a D&D game. Nothing says that 0 hit points is unconscious necessarily. I mean, I think they use the word, but incapacitated, I think is a
sure.
There's heavily incapacitated and functionally unconscious, but you're still able to function. I think you see that a lot, in movies where somebody's mortally wounded. They're not able to really functionally move, but they're lying on the ground. They might be gasping. Their eyes are open.
Inigo Montoya. You
might see them try to get to their feet, but they just can't get the strength under their arm, let alone their legs underneath them. And you have that moment where the villain looks at them and and says something dramatic, and then polishes them off with a coup de grace.
Right.
Give your characters that style moment.
Rob Roy.
You lost me there.
Dueling sequence at the end of the movie. The two of them are finally dueling.
Okay.
And he literally is.
What's the setup here?
The setup is the two it's the antagonist and the protagonist are fighting for the end. Okay. There's a lot that's built up to this moment.
What's the setting? Is this a Western?
I'm sorry. England. And Ireland and Scotland.
Okay, gotcha.
I want to say, now my time periods are going to be totally off on this one. 1800s?
Sure. Okay.
1700s?
Okay, so we're dueling with swords in an English setting.
Claymore versus a rapier, in fact.
Gotcha, okay.
And the rapier's literally chewing this claymore apart.
Oh, wow.
Up until, it gets near the end and he gets a couple good cuts on him, but he goes to stab him and he actually grabs the blade of... it's clear that the one guy is probably bested, and he grabs the blade of the rapier while it's piercing him, and literally is fighting. The guy is probably inches from death, and stands up and ends up splitting the guy in half with the claymore.
Oh, wow.
And, I mean, that's a coup de grace.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's what a claymore can do.
But that's what a claymore can do.
And
it's got all that weight behind it.
And that's the feeling is that it's the impact of that duel building and building and building to a point through the whole story that you get that moment. And it's impactful. Yeah. It's meaningful.
And this, I think, again, is why, I think it's important, like we mentioned earlier, to have those discussions ahead of time of, how do you see your character dying? Because this at least sets it up for you. So if you do run into a situation where you're like, oh God, I don't know if I could kill this character or not, you've already discussed it. And if that character wants to die in a glorious battle, you are in a glorious battle,
yep,
here you are.
Here you go.
Now's the time. Strike while the iron's hot,
Do you want to hit a question before we kind of close things up?
Well, I think we should talk a little bit about the player implications, though.
Oh, yes.
We only have a couple questions, so I kind of want to drive this one as far as I can here.
Sure.
So when you get into the player implications of things, so we're stepping entirely away from the narrative of things.
Okay.
So we're just talking about dealing with the players at the table when this sort of event happens.
Is everyone prepared?
So, first off, if you're too cautious about killing your characters, if you don't properly follow through with enough danger to at least dangle the threat of death in front of them, you run the risk that certain players, and certain players are okay with this. Certain players will not change how they act whatsoever. They'll always act like danger is present. But you will have certain characters that will start metagaming it.
Yeah.
Okay? And by that I mean they will see your restraint as a DM, and as a player think to themselves, the DM isn't going to actually kill us.
Right.
He's too chicken shit. He's not going to kill us. We don't have to be careful anymore.
Right.
Because it doesn't matter what we do. Right. We're not going to die.
Sure.
You know? I mean, you definitely want to avoid killing a character to teach them a lesson.
I don't agree with that.
Because that's just spiteful. You don't agree that you shouldn't kill a character to teach them a lesson?
Oh, no, I agree that you shouldn't just teach lessons that way.
Okay. I misunderstood
that's silly.
your
that's
meaning.
Just straight up silly.
Yeah, but that's punitive
it's
and that's
petty.
And that's petty.
Yeah.
But
you're a better DM than that.
You do want to just make sure that there's just enough danger there to keep them guessing. So if you do it, if you kill a character, we talked a little bit earlier, grieving is a real thing. It is an emotional, stressful moment.
Yep.
And it can also be very triggering. Like in the legitimate psychological sense. I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but I want everybody to understand we really mean honest to goodness triggering of like trauma.
Sure.
For character death. And that's one of the reasons why you may want to have these discussions ahead of time. Just to make sure that everybody's okay with it. I mean, there's plenty of ways you can sideline a character, that you can inconvenience a character. We talked about, having consequences like they lose some of their belongings or they're out of play for a little bit. They may lose a contact or a valued item or something like that. So you don't have to have death in your game if everybody's not comfortable with it. But just be aware that it is a big, big event for some people.
Yeah, and I also say that if you've got other characters that you develop into the story, NPCs that they're around, guides, kings, lords, ships, things like that, sometimes having them die in a meaningful way and it just not getting resurrected can mean a lot. I know in my game, my D&D game, I've killed a couple people that have nothing to do with your players.
Oh, yeah.
And they have meaning. Those deaths have shown you what the world is like. I mean, literally you came across the body of someone you knew.
Yeah.
Who had been gutted alone in the desert.
My character took that very personally for a lot of reasons.
Yep. So
yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a great way to remind your players that lethality is a thing, is a factor, but you don't have to directly affect the group. It indirectly affected us.
It does.
Very, very powerfully.
Yeah.
But none of us died.
Correct.
You don't have to kill a PC to be able to do that. It's definitely good not to only take care during the scene in which a character dies, but make sure that there's emotional aftercare after the scene.
Oh, God, yeah. Always aftercare.
So always you want to check in with the player, let them share their thoughts, let them talk about how their character died, how they feel about that. Listen to them, let them talk through it, and check back with them. It can be, like I said, a very emotional thing. We get very attached to these people. Our brains start acknowledging that these people are in some way real.
Yeah.
And it can affect us very much like that.
Yep.
If a player isn't dealing well with their character's death, or possibly that it was found that it was unfairly ruled. Like, you looked it up in the player's handbook and you find out that, oh crap, that spell in no way had enough range to reach you. to kill you in the first place, or something like that. Just as an example, you know, we all make mistakes. You know, I've made some pretty big mistakes while storytelling. Usually you just kind of roll with it and you move on, but if the consequence of that mistake was the death of a character,
Yeah.
you know, see if there's a way to maybe roll that from a death into an out of action.
Right.
You know, we discussed a lot of those out of actions that you can do,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where they just show up later, maybe wounded, maybe slightly inconvenienced, but you can probably safely bring them back and not have the story be too interrupted.
Yep. Very true.
The golden rules, I think, the big, you know, summary at the end of this is we are all here to have fun.
Yes.
And
Have
tell
fun.
interesting stories.
Yes.
It's not losing to retcon a death.
No.
It shouldn't be done lightly, but don't be afraid to do it if the happiness and enjoyment of everyone is at stake.
Yes. I agree.
You know, if someone is just utterly broken up and can't accept the loss of their character, find a way to
Figure it
bring
out.
them back. Figure it out.
Figure it out.
Figure it out.
Make it better.
Also, don't, you know, if you're going to do it, don't do it lightly. Stories end when people die.
Yes.
There's plenty of stories you can tell where people have survived and moved on.
Yep. I agree.
Okay. Questions?
Let's hit him.
All right. So Overwatch asks, what's a standout death scene that comes to mind from a book, movie, or show? Would that translate over to the tabletop? Why or why not?
Well, I brought up Rob Roy. 100% I would agree that could translate, without a doubt, either into 7th Sea or even D&D.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that be a dual fight that happens and turns, without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely. You brought up The Professional, which is one of my favorite.
I think that could definitely happen. I could see that happening in Shadowrun, actually, very clean.
Oh, absolutely.
You know.
Actually, I think in the second season of Critical Role, they did something very similar with they had a necklace of fireballs. The beads on the necklace were enchanted with fireball spells, and they did something very similar where it was just, okay, if I'm going,
Yep.
you're going with me.
Yep. There's been a few others though, but I mean, those are the ones that kind of stick out in my mind as meaningful fight sequence. I think another one that I don't really think of as a death sequence, but clearly was the end of the 13th Warrior. Bolvi dying and sitting on the throne.
Oh yeah.
You don't think of it as a death sequence because it finishes that scene and then he sits down, and that's it. He's dead.
Yeah.
Like as a D&D party, which is what that effectively was, you get to watch that moment play out.
Yeah. There's a similar one in the Brothers Bloom.
Okay.
And it's I think it's Adrian Brody and who plays Bruce Banner?
I know who you're thinking of. Anyways, keep going.
But anyways, so him
Ruffalo?
and Ruffalo, yeah, Mark Ruffalo, and Rachel Weisz. They're con artists. And,
Okay.
Something goes wrong, something goes sideways, and I want to say it's Ruffalo's character takes a bullet, and he hides it from his brother, who's played by not Orlando Bloom, Adrian Brody.
Okay.
And he hides it from him, and basically says like, you know what, this is our last big score. Why don't you and her just go and live your life and be happy and stuff like that? Just leave me here. I'll be fine. He's like, really? You okay? Yeah. And they walk out on him, and he just sits down in his chair and just watches them walk out. And at that point, as the viewer, you don't know what happened. And as Adrian Brody's kind of getting into the car and they're driving off, he looks down and realizes he has blood all over his hand from hugging his brother,
who's dying.
And that's how you find out that death scene happened. And I
Yeah.
thought that might be beautiful. Like if you do have, one of those moments where, your character's taken lethal damage, but maybe not in such a violent way that it's like an immediate, coup de grace style death.
Right.
To go out maybe like that.
Poisons or something like that.
Yeah.
Or
get your chances to say goodbye,
Or red. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Yep.
What a way to walk out of your own death sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part of that was setting it up because he had to die, and there was only one person who was going to kill him fast, and that was one of his friends. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The last one I can think of is actually from it's technically not a death scene, and it's a bit of a Wheel of Time spoiler, but from Wheel of Time, the character is presumed dead until he shows back up. So I apologize if anybody is spoiled by this by Wheel of Time, but Lan Mandragoran, who is a warder, he's essentially like a samurai, a warrior character of that sort. And he's a very beloved character. He's through the entire series. He's there, and he's a sword master. So he's very much in that sort of samurai style. A lot of the sword play is very Asian styled, and there's a move that they talk about occasionally through the story called sheathing the blade.
Okay.
Which is kind of what you were talking about in Rob Roy, where you step into the person's blow, and you take the stab so that their sword is tied up.
Right.
And you can just cut them down.
Right.
And he's fighting a big bad guy at the end of the final battle, and he sheathes the sword on him, and you're like, no, because it was always described as like, if you do this, like, you're dead, but you're taking your opponent with you. You know? The only time you do that is if you consigned yourself to death.
Right.
And you watch him sheath the blade, and you're like,
yeah. Well, I mean, it's Chekhov's gun. Yeah, it had to happen.
And then he shows up like 3 chapters later, nursing this wound in his side, going, jerk almost got me.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing is that, like, in Red, like, she could have shot me here.
But she shot me here. He points to his heart.
Yeah.
She shot me in the chest because, if she shot me in the head, she'd have killed me. But instead she shot me here because she loves me and she wanted me to survive the wound.
Yeah. Exactly. But it still looked lethal. So that things like that, like that, I could see that easily written into like an adventure game where like the villain does that, has a sniper shot come through, and it's supposed to kill you, and it like knocks you out of the window and into the water, and you're like, oh, great, well, what happened? And like shows the scar. He's like, we've been dating for 3 weeks.
Right.
I love the way she curls her toes just before she squeezes the trigger.
She does love me. Aww.
Yeah, I love that love sequence.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Knox asks, if you game often with the same people, would it be weird to have an actual memorial piece for players to commemorate their characters they've lost over various campaigns? Something like a graveyard or a memorial in home. I actually want to do this in my basement, but not necessarily for memorials of characters who have died, but for all of the characters who've been in my games, who have been retired and things like that. Like, I want to put little artifacts all over the place in my basement. Yeah. Like, my gaming space will be surrounded by artifacts of my stories.
I was going to say, is it weird? I mean,
I don't think so.
We have a talk show about telling other adults how to play make believe better.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think it's weird.
No, I don't think it's
weird.
I don't
think it's weird at all.
I think memorializing things is something we do without realizing it.
Yeah.
I mean, do you keep your teddy bear? Is that weird? Because, you keep it in the closet because it was the one your grandmother gave you and she's no longer around and you're remembering that?
Yeah, look. I mean, we talked a lot during this episode about how we get attached to these characters.
Yeah.
And it's because we're sharing experiences with them. We're spending time with them.
Yeah, we're investing.
We're watching them grow. We're watching them have adventures.
Yep.
We're getting invested in just the same way that you would with a TV character, with a movie character, probably even more so.
I would say more
because you're experiencing it firsthand.
Yes.
In your own mind at your table with your friends.
Yes.
So there's a camaraderie aspect to it, and there's a personalization of it because it's a first person experience. So even more so than, I've seen people, who have their little hobby setups or over on their shelves. I'm looking right over Rob's shoulder right now, and he's got Funko Pops up there. He's got some Robotech mechs up there. He's got, a handful of other little trinkets and tchotchkes and whatnot, all to commemorate his fandom and his enjoyment of these characters. And we think nothing strange about that.
No.
So I don't think anything strange about getting good, memorializing characters from your role-playing games.
No, I making shadow boxes are really great. I saw someone doing those for people when they had like a moment in a game. They could this artist was willing to do a shadow box of them for it. So, I don't think it's weird at all.
Yeah,
I think we could definitely do it. Now, next week, you're doing a game system spotlight for Adventure.
Tales of the Aeon Society. So, if you are curious about the first game chronologically in the Aeon verse, We're going to be talking about that by White Wolf Games, and we're going to do a deep dive into the system.
You can find us on Twitter at @ST_conclave, on Instagram at ST_conclave, or every Wednesday night at 7 on MixLR, which you're listening to us live if you are. If you're not, please come join us. You can also find our link on our Twitter to our Discord. We'd love to have you join the conversations. Or you can find our website at storyteller-conclave.blueberry.net.
I want to give a big shout out to our Patreon members for supporting our show, especially Knox in the Box, Sam, and the Arcane Asylum. We really appreciate you contributing to keep us going on this. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Guy Frog. You can find him at guyfrogmusic.weebly.com. And our outro music, which you're hearing now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find her at soundcloud.com/midairmachine.
We'd like to thank our family and our friends. Vicky, Sean, thank you for helping us do this each time. Those of you who are listening to us, everyone who plays our games with us, and those who have been left behind, both characters and players. We want you to have a wonderful evening and a blessed life. We love you.
We love you so much.
Good night.
Good night.